Hello, welcome to MFM2PI. This is our 5th unit, Trigonometry. This is lesson number 6. And this is really just not so much a lesson, I guess, as an opportunity to put together a graphic organizer to help us figure out which of the tools that we've learned how to use in this trigonometry unit we should employ in certain situations when we're looking for particular things or when we're given particular things. So there's 2 graphic organizers we're going to fill out today. We're not going to fill them out entirely. I'm not going to do all the work for you since this is a tool for you to use, but I'm certainly going to give you, we're going to fill out the skeleton of this for sure, and that'll leave you to fill in the examples on your own. So let's start by looking at our objective. Our objective is to create a graphic organizer that will help us when we are in a situation where we are trying to find particular missing pieces of information in a right angle triangle. And we're going to try to figure out which tool we should use. So let's start by looking at, this is our first of the 2 graphic organizers, and this one's going to provide us with the givens. So here we have been given 2 sides. So let's say we've been given a right angle triangle, we've been given 2 sides, and the right angle obviously. How are we going to find the missing side? So let's look at that one first. Let's look at one side. So we've been given 2 sides. We want to find the third side. We are going to use the Pythagorean theorem to do this. So I'll write this in, the Pythagorean theorem. And in terms of an example, what I'd like you to do is go back to the appropriate lesson and write out in here just a little example of how to use the Pythagorean theorem. So the Pythagorean theorem itself is c squared equals a squared plus b squared, and that for us was found in lesson number 1. So I'm not going to fill in the rest of that. What I'd like you to do is just fill in an example here so that you have a reference, a very specific reference on how to employ the Pythagorean theorem when you're given 2 sides to find the third side of a right angle triangle. So what if we've been given 2 sides, but what we're after is one angle instead? So how do we find that? Now obviously we're already going to have the right angle in there since we're dealing with a right angle triangle. But what if we are given 2 sides, we have the right angle, but we want to find one of the other 2 angles? What we're going to need to employ is the primary, whoops, that's the highlighter. We are going to use the primary trig ratios. Primary trig ratios. And again, we were using this, and that would be something like, I'll just write out so, ka, toa here as a bit of a cue for you. And we found this in, we're looking for an angle, so this would be lesson number 3. Lesson number 3. I think it was lesson number 3. You know what, I'm going to go have a quick look just to make sure it was lesson number 3. Lesson number 3 is not the right one. We found angles, that was lesson number 4. I'm sorry, that's my mistake. So let's get back to it. So we're going to call that lesson number 4 actually. There we go. Lesson number 4. And again, I'd like you to go back to lesson number 4 and fill out an example here where you're given 2 sides in a right angle triangle and what you're after is one of the other 2 angles that's not the 90 degrees. So we've got this half filled out. What if we weren't given 2 sides? What if instead we were given 1 side and 1 angle? And what we want to find is the other side. One other side on this triangle. Again, we are going to use primary trig ratios. Primary trig ratios. And we went over finding side lengths. So SOHCAHTOA, that's what we used. And that was in the last lesson we did actually, which was lesson number 5. So again, I'd like you to go back to the lesson. Find an example that suits this particular instance where you are given a side and an angle and you want to find a missing side. And in our last example, what if we are given a side and 1 angle and what we want to find is one of the other angles? So we've been given 1 angle, we already have the 90-degree angle. We are going to use what's called the sum of interior angles. Sum of interior angles. And that's the one where we have 180 degrees minus 90 degrees minus something, who knows, whatever it is, to get our actual angle. And we found this was actually all the way back in lesson number 3, I believe. Nope, lesson number 3 is not it. This is in lesson number 4. So this was how to find an angle if you've been given the two other angles, so a 90 degree and then one of the non-90 degree angles. We can just take the 90, take that other angle, subtract them both from 180, and that will give us the one remaining angle. So we've got this filled out now. What I'd like you to do at this point, or when you're done the video, I'd like you to go back and visit all of 3 of these lessons, so lesson 1, lesson 4, lesson 5, and write out these particular examples to support this graphic organizer. Hopefully that sounds good. Let's head on to the second graphic organizer now. It's sort of the same thing. You'll notice how in this one we're focusing on what we've been given and then subsequently what it is that we need to find. But we could also consider this from the other perspective, which is what if we need to find a side and we've been given 2 sides already? In a lot of ways this is going to be a very similar graphic organizer. So we are going to, in the first case, if I've been given 2 sides, and what I need to find is that third side, I'm going to use the Pythagorean theorem again. Pythagorean theorem. And the Pythagorean theorem, of course, was c squared equals a squared plus b squared. And that was from lesson number 1, I think it was. Lesson number 1. And again, at your leisure, head back. I'd like you to write out an example here that will illustrate to you how to use the Pythagorean theorem to find the third side when you've been given 2 sides. But what if you've not been given 2 sides? What if you've been given instead 1 side and 1 angle, and you want to find the other side? What we're going to use in this instance is the primary trig ratios. Primary trig ratios. So we've been given a side and an angle, and what we're after is a side. So this is going to be SOHCAHTOA. Again, just a little reminder for you. And this was in lesson number 5, where we're going to go figure out what that other side value is. So that's if we need a side. What if what we need is an angle? And what we've been given are 2 sides. If we've been given 2 sides and we're trying to find an angle, we are going to use the primary trig ratios again. Primary trig ratios. We've got our primary trig ratios, that's SOHCAHTOA. And that was from, let me think about it. So we want an angle and we've been given 2 sides, so that is going to be lesson number 4. Lesson number 4. So again, head back, fill out an example here that helps you find an angle, something that you need when you've been given 2 sides. Last but not least, what if we want an angle and what we've been given is 1 side and 1 angle? What we have at this point is we have 2 angles. The 90, of course, we want an angle, but we've been given the second of 3 angles. So what we can use is the sum of interior angles to find that last angle that we need. So that one, again, just as a little point of reference, would be like 180 degrees minus 90 degrees minus a certain other unknown angle to get our third angle. And that is also going to be lesson number 4. So this completes our second graphic organizer. Again, this is sort of a 2-sided sheet. You can bring this in when you're completing your practice test. Obviously, I think it's way more beneficial if you go back in and complete one example from each of these 3 lessons to fill out these 4 slots on the second half of this graphic organizer so that you can truly have all the resources at your disposal when you're completing the practice test. So from here, there actually is no homework. You're going to complete this and then you're going to head on to objective or lesson number 7. Good luck.